And I would like to invite Renee Flacking, and she's also a very old friend of mine, also approximately 30 years back, I think, no, or maybe not. 20. But she actually is, we discussed this last night, didn't we? We met.
We did last night.
Yeah. We met in the early 90s, not here at Karolinska, because at that point of time, Agneta Kleber and I, we worked in Falun, and we have a group of people from Falun here. And now you have continued to the academic world, and now you're a professor at the University of Dalarna, and we are very much honored to have you here, and also very grateful for all the work you do for, not the least, the non-separation theme of premature infants and families. Thank you very much, Renee.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm not a professor yet. I might be in a month. I've applied, but I'm still an associate professor, which is really good as well. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm really honored, so thank you so much. And I have to say, it's so great to be at a conference where the title is Pleasurable Feeding. So again, thank you for that. I'm going to be speaking about trends, support, and mothers' experiences of feeding. I'm not going to go back as far in time as Jeffrey did. I'm going to go back in the mid-1990s. I was working at the neonatal unit in Falun, together with Björn, Agneta, and Inga-Lill. A brilliant unit at the time, and we had, you know, I know there's a lot of neonatal nurses here. At least way back, we had all these days, care developing days, where we discussed strategies and goals and what we wanted to do, and the aims, what we wanted to achieve. And one of these days, one of the neonatal nurses in our unit said that, I think we should aim to have 80% moms breastfeeding at discharge. I was fairly new at the time, so I had two thoughts that has actually guided me through all the way through my research. One was, right, okay, so with such an aim, are we then going to push moms, force moms into breastfeeding? The other one was, okay, so what is the rate right now? What is the percentage of moms breastfeeding in our neonatal unit? So I did my first study in our unit. It's quite a small unit, but I would say it's more an average unit in Sweden, at least I think it was at the time. So I did a study about looking at preterm low birth weight infants. So we had 70 infants in 1996, of which 74% were breastfeeding exclusively and 18% partially, which meant that 93% of the moms were breastfeeding at discharge. And as you can see, the ones that weren't breastfeeding, those infants' mothers were undergoing chemotherapy or had a breast reduction. We were doing really good at the time. Now you can see where I'm going, aren't you? I'm going down. A couple of years ago, I, together with Jenny Eriksson, Lena Hellström Vestas, Mats Eriksson, we started to do a study about, it was a huge multi-center randomized controlled trials about breastfeeding support after discharge. So a proactive support. And I think there might be a few of you who've been involved in that study. Hands up. Yay! Hi! When we started to do that study, we struggled to recruit moms because a lot of moms weren't breastfeeding. So, apart from doing that study, she also, together with us as a team, looked at the data from the Swedish Neonatal Quality Register to see what is the trend, what is happening with breastfeeding in Sweden. So, as you can see, in this decade, the breastfeeding at discharge, so that is looking at all preterm infants who are discharged, looking at exclusive, partial and not breastfeeding, you can see that it has been a change. So we have about equal amount of moms now breastfeeding exclusively and partially. The decrease of not breastfeeding, well, the rate of not breastfeeding has increased slightly. But if we're looking at the three gestational groups, we could see, looking at just exclusive breastfeeding, we could see a really dramatic decrease in the extremely preterm infants, going from 55% to 15% in a decade. It's really bad in the other two groups as well, but especially in the extremely preterm infants. So, is this just happening in Sweden? Is Sweden unique? Or is everyone doing better, or are they doing worse? It's really difficult, because in Sweden we do have the access to this great quality register, which most countries don't. They don't have the data, so we can't look at the trends. But, and I hope now for the next coming slides, don't quote me, because I'm doing something that is quite not really scientific. I'm going to be looking at, because if we want to see what's happening, we need to have at least 2 time points. So looking at what happens in 2004 and then 11 and 12, and we can do that due to 2 great studies that have been done. Well, one is not finished. The Mosaic study that was conducted with a cohort of infants born 2003, and then the Peace Project, which was a continuation of the Mosaic project. That was undertaken with infants born 2011 and 12. I have to acknowledge that I was not part of this research team, although I would love to be. They used the same population in these 2 studies, so infants born very preterm. In one of them, they had 8 regions across Europe, and in the other one, they had 19. So comparing those numbers, and this is where I don't want you to quote me. So in 2 regions, Italy and Poland, as you can see, there is a slight decrease of exclusive breastfeeding among the very preterm infants. But France, Netherlands, Belgium, they're doing really well. Congratulations. It's really an increase of exclusive breastfeeding. So looking at Sweden, and that was the national cohort of infants, but I didn't have the 2003, I have 2004. So we had 46% of the moms breastfeeding exclusively, but now we're down to 30. So there's definitely a decrease. But it's not like it's happening all over Europe. We do have different patterns going on. So what is happening in Sweden? So I'm not here to say that Sweden is doing so great. It's amazing when you're abroad and people say, oh, Sweden is doing, amazing. You go, yeah, really? So I'm going to focus on a few areas that I think is important and that we need to acknowledge and address, at least within Swedish neonatal care. So it's the environment, it's interpersonal resources, it's staff, and it's routines and policies. And we're going to start by looking at the environment. What has happened? We all know that we have moved on from a lot of incubator care to a lot of skin-to-skin care. We've moved from open bay units to have more single-room units. That's brilliant. In Sweden, and this is a non-published study by me and Mats Eriksson in Örebro, 62% of the neonatal units in Sweden now offer or facilitates for mother to stay 24/7 in the neonatal units, and half of the units enables fathers to stay on board. It's so great. We've had speakers that said they had to deviate a bit, so I am deviating now. In 2010, 11 maybe, I did an ethnographic study in Swedish and neonatal units looking at breastfeeding feeding process with a focus on relationality. I'm much more relational than nutritional, although I'm sure I do have nutrition in my body. So that's what I did in these 4 units, 2 in Sweden and 2 in England. So I spent 11 months of doing ethnographic observation and interviews. And for those of you who don't know what ethnography is, it's when you're basically sitting on a chair in a corner and try to blend in with the wall. And when you see something interesting, you kind of move out and you do some interaction and you talk to people and you say, so what did happen there and how do you feel and what going on. And then you blend in with the wall again. So I did that for 11 months. So I did 600 hours of observations, 300 hours of direct observation and interviews. So I interviewed 50 moms, 20 dads, and more than 100 staff. What we found in this study was a lot of things. But we really wanted to focus on feeding. So not just breastfeeding, because that was really difficult at the time in England, because in the neonatal units, very few people were breastfeeding. Much more common in Sweden. So we wanted to look at what happened, how can we describe feeding in terms of something else than successful breastfeeding, which has always been, when we talked about successful breastfeeding, is always breastfeeding duration. So what is a happy feeding? What's a pleasurable feeding? And what factors affect that? So we had attuned feeding that we came up with as a concept. Attuned feeding and an attuned relationship. And what was that? It's when the moms feel, and dads, a sense of connectedness, where you feel present emotionally here and now, and you have a shared awareness with that baby, and you can tune in to his or her emotional and physical need, and it's not there, and then you can respond appropriately to that. That's what an attuned feeding and attuned relationship was desired to be, what they wanted, and what some experienced. So then, going back to the environment again. So what happens in these environments when we moved from open bay to single room units? In one of the units, they had made that change. So they've had the open bay, now they had the single room. And one of the nurses said, the big difference is that these parents kangaroo care their infants immediately after birth, and then they move into a room, and we have never interrupted the presence. They have a total togetherness. They never leave their infant. They take turns. It's amazing. And when they do that, when they have that own space, that's the sense of ownership. I own this space. Not only the space, but it's also my baby. And it's my face. Because when I'm here, you're all looking at my face. And it's the same in the neonatal unit. You have all the people looking at your face, looking at if you're sad or happy. If you're happy, is that good or bad? So finally, you can have your face to yourself, which is really beneficial. So it's really good thing with these single room units. I have the opportunity to be visiting associate professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So I go there once in a while and I teach. And then I also visit neonatal units. And there are some really amazing units and not so really amazing units. And this is from an average neonatal unit. So moms can come in, roughly, they have to sign in and then they are led to the incubator. There is no chair and they can be there for 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the afternoon. So, and the other one is from a Swedish neonatal unit. So this is a win-win situation. Hands up who thinks that the Hong Kong unit has the highest breastfeeding rates at discharge. We have one brave soul. And how many people do think it's the Falun or any other unit in Sweden that has the highest breastfeeding rates? You're so losers. What happens here is that Hong Kong definitely has so much higher breastfeeding rates at discharge. And I'm working with the WHO, so it's breast milk feeding. It's not directly at breast. They are much higher than we have. And why is that? Because what happens in these units, if you can't be there, what do staff tell you? They say, breast milk is the only thing you can give to your baby. It's the only thing you can do as a mom. And what do? You breastfeed and you pump because it's the only thing you can do. And I think we did the same. I did. I'm sure I did. I've not been a really good nurse in my days. I'm sure I did say that to moms as well in our unit. we're doing a lot of bad things in neonatal units, but that was one of the things that we used to say. But now, you would never say that to a parent who's doing kangaroo care 24/7. You would never walk in and say, well, breastfeeding is the only thing you can do for your baby. They would think I have my pages glued together and that the elevator did not go up. I'm sure they do. So it's insane to say that. So we don't say that. So one of the nurses, she said, before, parents couldn't live here with their babies and the staff had the control. It was breastfeeding that strengthened them in their role. But now, if you get a chance to live with your baby, independent how you feed, you are close, you have the control of the situation, and we see the parents more as parents now, regardless of how they feed. So that's good. It's good because we are strengthening parents to be parents, having a lot of kangaroo care and being in a single room. How about breastfeeding then? This is a mom. She said, we had the room to ourselves and we could withdraw from everything. We could focus on him and it was peace and quiet and we could hear him. I saw that he was searching, so I just put him at the breast and he started to suck, and he hadn't before. It was a breakthrough. There were just a few hours in between feedings and I was enabled freedom. I didn't look at the clock, but I did as he wanted. God, how great. We were attuned to him. So really good. This is going well. However, we do have an issue with these doors and these corridors. We have to find ways of communicating. One of the nurses described it like this. You don't enter the room in the same way as when the parents stayed in the open bay rooms. Then a mother could say something when I passed. Now she has to actively call or let someone know. And I think that is a huge change of paradigm that we need to do as staff. We need to find ways of actually entering someone else's room and sit down on the floor or on a chair and chat and talk. Because we have to have that trust in between. We can't, like we do sometimes, we knock on the door, we open the door when the mom says yes, and then we go, how's it going? And she said, fine, great. And then we close the door. I'm not saying we're doing it constantly, but there has been a change where we need to find new ways of entering the room, either bringing things in or bringing things out, and sit down and communicate. And I think that we have to kind of rethink about how to do that. Interpersonal resources. Does that affect breastfeeding? Yeah, it does. If you have a low socioeconomic status, you might feel depressed. Not even depressed, just anxious, insecure. When you have all these experiences in life, you might be more prone to feeling shame and being insufficient or not good enough. It's a struggle. And when we have fewer resources to cope, breastfeeding is really demanding because it takes so much energy out of you because it's an emotional and physical activity that you're doing together with someone. And apart from those events that happens in life during pregnancy and birth, we never talk about this really. Very rarely do we talk about the birth trauma, the birth experience for moms. We're talking about the baby. We need to talk much more about the birth for the mothers and how they feel and what their experience has been. So I'm back to, we can't have an attuned feeling. It's like falling in love. If we're really anxious and insecure and we're struggling with a lot of things, it's really difficult to fall in love. I'm happened to fall in love many times in my life, but I've been down as well. I've never fallen in love when I've been really low. And it's not that everyone needs to have like a perfect attuned feeding. Breastfeeding in itself is really hard work and it takes that energy. So we need to address all these issues. One of them is also understanding the present and the past in this. What has happened? What have I experienced back, and what am I experiencing now? So one of the mothers said, I started to feel emotionally close about 1 week after birth, because the first week was difficult with lots of tears and everything that happened so quickly. So I would say when everything has calmed down and you've had the time to understand what has happened and what you've been through. Another mom said, we might be here for 8 more weeks. It feels like oceans of time, and I start to think, who am I? And the parental role is new, and you need to find it. I lost my mom when I was 15, so you want to be a good parent. I feel apathetic. There is so much to grip, but I try not to think too much. I try to rest. I watch TV. You can't cope with your own reality, so you try to find one that you can rest in. And that single room actually provides that comforting, the holding environment. Because what that mom actually is doing, she's in that bed and she has that baby in kangaroo position, but she's not leaving. She doesn't have to leave the baby to rest. She can actually rest, but having the baby on and watch TV, which is a huge benefit. Shortage of staff. That's always been an issue, that we have too little time, too few people, and I think it's extremely current right now, the situation across Sweden. So why am I saying this? Is it improved or is it getting worse? Well, yeah, slightly. It is getting worse, but I wouldn't say it's the trend. Well, yes, it is a trend, but it's not when it was really going really bad. And why is this important? Because, as we've seen, to support moms from the early start, even, having kangaroo care with the ventilator, when the baby's on a CPAP, it starts to move, you have to be there, you have to be supportive in helping that mom and helping the baby to have that holding environment. That takes a lot of energy, and supporting breastfeeding takes a lot of time, and you can't rush it. You can't knock on the door and say, how's it going? That's not going to help. So you need to have staff on board. One of the mothers described this early start and a long journey, but she described that relational feel of what breastfeeding is in the early phase. She said, breastfeeding felt so right. So both kangaroo holding itself and just to lay her at my breast becomes something that's approaching the normal. I don't think she got any breast milk for the first time, but the second time she did. And from then on, we always breastfed when we had a kangaroo. Care routines. I don't know of any area that is so underexplored as breastfeeding. And the routines that we're doing, we're not doing evidence-based. We're trying, so we kind of just do what the traditions are. So, nipple shields. There is some good evidence that nipple shield reduces the chances of having a long breastfeeding duration. There are other qualitative work where we looked at the experiences, and some moms actually do want to have a nipple shield, and some staff do it because it's a rescue, so that they don't just stop breastfeeding. But in general, it's really good evidence, I would say, to not using nipple shields in neonatal units, at least not from the progressive side. The baby is ready when the baby is ready. Test weighing. Oh, the jury is still out on that one. I've always been arguing that test weighing is something bad, but I can also see that we do have a few studies that says that test weighing supports exclusive breastfeeding. It's just that from my point of view, it interrupts the whole process of the whole breastfeeding session. When you are putting you're weighing, you're breastfeeding, then you're weighing again, and then you're back again. That's not nice. That's not pleasurable. And also, you can see that the baby weighs less when you had been breastfeeding. Is that good? I wouldn't be too happy about that. Cues. I would love to have I would maybe hold all of your brain, but at least half of it, to look at that cues, really supporting moms to, and maybe we can't even support them through the cues, but actually maybe more about looking at the sleep cycle. How can we support and not using that damned clock that we do have? Fortification, yeah, they need to, a lot of these extremely preterm babies, they need to have fortification, but how do we communicate that? Cups is another thing. We've talked about cups. Might be good, might not be good for some. It's really tricky to use cups. It's a device. So we might end with a tube, a breast, a cup. Oh, it's getting a lot of things going on. And then you have to pump the milk as well. And then early discharge. Really good, probably, and it depends on the support that you are getting. But actually being in a home environment, it's always better to be back with your pack than maybe in more an isolated form in the neonatal unit. But there is so much evidence that we lack, and there's so much studies that we need to do in this area. I'm gonna summarize this by echo what Sophia said in the beginning. I loved it. That feeding is part of parenting. I think a lot of us breastfeeding researchers, we have paid way too much attention to just feeding and less about what's happening around us. It's a whole, we're a whole person, we're not two breastfeeding. So everything that happens during a day will affect the way we breastfeed and how well we can do that. We need to start acknowledging more emotions in the infants, because we might have very institutionalized environments where we don't acknowledge that these babies are have emotions. The parents have emotions that we need to acknowledge and support, and that staff have emotions, because we're never going to be able to implement anything if the staff don't like it. If we haven't addressed those issues, it's going to be really hard. I've just kind of person-centered care. I think that's definitely a way forward. NIDCAP is person-centered care. We need to make it broader and also looking at the parents, fathers and mothers, of which understanding the past and the present, that's part of it. But we need to really think about what has happened, and we need to make sure that parents are given the support they need to think about what's happened and share, hopefully and possibly, with other parents who are in the same situation. The peers are really crucial, important for parents if we guide it and support that and facilitate those discussions in a good way. And then we need to start reflecting on how we're communicating and supporting breastfeeding. We also have to address all those moms who are bottle feeding or who are formula feeding to an equal standard. I think that's, if we can do that, if we don't, there are units, I know that who are going to be able to sleep in a neonatal unit if you don't have enough rooms for everyone. We can't just provide that to breastfeeding parents and not to the ones who are formula feeding. We can't offer lunch or breakfast to breastfeeding moms and not to the formula feeding moms. That's inappropriate. And I'm sure some of you might disagree, but then we can have a discussion on that later on. Because I think that is what makes that whole, why I'm called a breastfeeding fanatic, and that I should go to hell. I get a lot of those. So I think with this having a more equal care and not valuing some more than others, I think that improves. But we need to start reflecting on how we communicate and how we can walk into these rooms. I'm going to end by the most beautiful quote ever, and it's from one of the neonatal nurses in Falun who said it like this. In breastfeeding there is everything: worries, fear, love, joy, sadness, the present, the physical closeness that has so many expressions, but also hopes, future, but most of all, love. If a mother at this unit has a chance to see her baby and feel trust in herself, then we've enabled the start of the bonding. Breastfeeding starts when the father carries the baby to the unit, or when they can take care of their baby the first day and we stand behind, but not too close. It's such things that sticks with you and facilitate the bonding. It's a process. Thank you.